Oh, hey there, Tunnel Lord. I couldn't hear you. Andy, can you hear me? No, Andy's muted. Tunnel Lord's muted. I'm early, so I have a bunch of guys. They joined early, so.
Hello.
Hey, there you are. I am actually in Newport Richey, Florida. I've got a nice group of people that I'm going to talk to for the next 20 minutes and then kick off the Q&A. So you're free to listen in, but we've had some scheduling and technical difficulties, so I'm going to give them a little intro, and then we'll do the Q&A, and I'll do the rest of my shtick after that. So we may do a shorter Q&A today.
Hello, people in the audience.
Hello. He says they can't hear you at the moment.
Yeah,
We got a room in a restaurant, and it's noisy and crazy, and I wasn't going to bring in my big amplified speakers so that the whole room could hear what you say when, So hello, everyone. Here, I'm going to drop this for a little bit so that they're not looking at me right through the Zoom camera at the moment. We're sorry for the delay, the scheduling, the setup, the craziness. Close. So everybody here, let me start this. My name is Paul Engel. I'm a constitutional scholar. I'm based out of Nashville, Tennessee. And I came here, Hello. I don't have a mic, so I gotta remember to talk loud, which is usually not a problem for me, but I want to thank everybody for coming, for putting up with the little craziness, the whatever. It's really kind of odd because I have about a 50-minute talk I normally give before I do the Q&A. But because we got such a late start, because I got people online that are waiting for me in about 15 minutes to have a Q&A, we'll do things a little differently. I'll start with, well, let me get you started. Ronald Reagan, back in 1961, said that freedom is never more than one generation away from extinction. We did not pass it on in the bloodstream. It must be fought for, defended, and then handed over to the next generation to do the same. Or one day we will find ourselves telling our children and our children's children what it once was like in America where men were free. I hate to tell you this, folks, but today is that day. I speak to student groups, college groups. I was speaking to a college group several months ago, and we were having an interesting discussion about rights and the infringements on rights and all of that. And one of these, and I can call him a young man because he's still in college and I'm much older than he is, said, well, Paul, you've been talking about rights and infringing on rights, but if it's the right thing to do, society hasn't fallen apart, what's the big deal? I took a beat. I looked him right in the Zoom camera because I wasn't allowed to be on campus, you see. And I went into a litany of the rights that had been infringed upon just in my lifetime. Freedom of religion. No. Government says we can tell you to bake cakes, arrange flowers, take pictures, design websites. Oh, by the way, you don't want to take a shot in the arm because of a religious exemption. Nope, we're going to approve your religious exemptions for you. You got to prove to us that you actually believe that. Freedom of speech, freedom of the press. I got kicked off of Facebook for talking about what the Constitution actually says about how the president is elected. If you say you can be fired or have your business shut down for using the wrong pronoun. And now the White House is going to take anything they don't like, label it misinformation, and hand it over to social media to shut you down and ban you. Freedom to peaceably assemble? Well, sure, if you're BLM and Antifa, you can riot, you can loot, you can pillage, you can commit arson and assault. But if you're protesting illegal activity during an election where the Democrat won, you get labeled an insurrectionist, you get thrown in jail, solitary confinement with inadequate food, medical care. visitation, even the ability to see your lawyer. Petition your government for redress of grievance. Good luck. You better have deep pockets, because the government says, no, you must get a license from somebody we recognize before we'll even allow you to come into court and petition. And when was the last time you tried to talk to your house rep face to face? A phone call. If you email them, all you're going to get is a form letter back. What about your right to be secure from unreasonable search and seizure? Anybody hear of civil asset forfeiture? Government says you're driving down the road, you get pulled over for speeding or broken tail light, and they happen to see cash. We assume that was ill-gotten gains. We will confiscate the cash, and you have to prove it was not criminally obtained before they'll give it back. You have to spend money to get your money back that they stole from you. And it's not just cash. They'll take your car, they'll take your home. What about the right to consent to the powers of government? Declaration of Independence says that to secure our rights, governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed. Except we watch government enact powers we did not consent to, and do it over and over and over and over again. Why? Because we, the people, forgot who's boss. We forgot who created whom. Now, I have a story I want to get into, but I know I've only got a few minutes before we run to that. Let me tell you this quick story, and then I'll pick it up after the Q&A. Shortly after COVID hit, early in 2020, I had a table at a homeschool book fair in a neighboring county. I show up, it was outdoors. I put my little pop-up tent. I set up my table. I got my books and stuff on it, just like that one back there. And as I'm finishing setting up, the coordinator comes by and says, listen, Paul, the county has instituted a mask mandate. Now, we're on private property, so we should be fine. Go ahead. But we are next to the road, and we don't know what the police are going to do. I look at her and say, I don't care. That mask mandate's illegal. It's empty. It's void. It's meaningless. And if an officer attempts to enforce it, they're committing a federal crime. Then I handed her one of these. Trust me, you'll all get one, because this is what I'm going to talk about when we get to the other end. But here's the part I want you to remember. See, I understood my rights. I started this thing called the Constitution Study based on a quote from John Jay. Anybody heard of John Jay? He's an unimportant founding father, right? I mean, all he did was help negotiate and sign the Treaty of Paris at the end of the Revolutionary War. He was in the Continental Congress when they drafted the Constitution. He wrote several of the Federalist Papers. He was the second governor of the state of New York, and he was the first Chief Justice of the United States. And he knows nothing about the Constitution. He said, every member of the state ought diligently to read and study the Constitution of his country and teach the rising generation to be free. By knowing their rights, they'll sooner perceive when they are violated and be the better prepared to defend and assert them. I'm a perfect example of that. I was standing there. I recognized a mask mandate violated my rights. Not only that, it violated my rights. I knew what rights it violated. I knew how to defend them, and I knew how to assert them. So when the lady who coordinated this said, if the police show up, we're sending them to your table, my answer was, be my guest. I'm prepared. Most people are not. So what I want to do, and again, normally I'm going to do a Q&A because we got some people online that like to ask questions. Now, it's a little weird because of the noise. You're probably not going to be able to hear them. I can hear them. But I'm going to take questions from you and from them, and we'll do this for a little while, and then I'll go finish up what I was doing. All right? Because I want to make sure you get this information because, well, I drove all the way from Nashville, Tennessee to the Tampa area to teach people like you all around the Tampa area. And I've had a great time doing it. I've met some really great people. We've had a lot of fun. So what I want to do is, let's see if I got, No picture, just your voice. Yeah, okay, so North Dakota. So people who are starting on the live stream, hello, live stream. I apologize, it's a little dark in here. I am in Newport Richey, Florida. I'm in a restaurant and the lighting is just not that great. So unfortunately, you don't get to see my ugly mug, which may be a good thing. But I got a great bunch of people here and I'm ready to take some questions both online and here in person. Now, this is how it's going to work. Since I got to juggle several different apps to make this happen. If you've got a question, just flag me, let me know here in the restaurant. I'll make sure you get to. If you are online, if you're watching on one of the live streams, type your question into the comment and I will read it and then answer it. For those of you on Zoom, since I don't have my second monitor set up, if you have a question, just raise your voice and I'll catch up with you and we'll just kind of go round robin and see where things go. And when whatever comes up on my screen or whatever they tell me in my ear, I will repeat to the crowd so that you know what questions we're dealing with. It'll be a little odd, but it should be a lot of fun. So with that primer in place, with that introduction, who has the first question for me? I know you guys haven't got questions because I haven't talked about your stuff yet. Why does she keep leaving messages through? We're having some issues. Okay, who's got the first question? But anything constitutional, I don't care.
This whole shot mandate, I mean, it seems unconstitutional the way that it's been handled.
Absolutely is. Absolutely is. In fact, I was just a couple weeks ago talking to a group closer to my place. And in fact, actually, take that. I wrote an article. It should be published Monday from my website, constitutionstudy.com, info in the back, where I talk about the Supremacy Clause and the 10th Amendment versus mandates, kind of a 2-on-1 scenario. So remember, Jen Psaki said, well, federal law trumps state law. Well, it's not always true. See, the Supremacy Clause says this Constitution and the laws of the United States made in pursuance thereof, and all treaties made or which shall be made under the authority of the United States shall be the supreme law of the land. And the judges in every state are bound thereby, anything in the laws or constitution of any state notwithstanding. So she's partially correct. Laws of the United States supersede state law if they're made pursuant to the Constitution. So, does the federal government have the legal authority to make medical decisions for you? No. I'm going to get into a bit more of the background of that after the Q&A. So the answer is no, but it gets better. So they don't have, so since that is not a power delegated to the United States, 10th Amendment says, power is not delegated to the United States by this Constitution, nor prohibited by to the states, are retained by the states, or are retained by the states, respectively, or with the people. So if the Constitution doesn't say, United States, federal government, you can do this, they can't do it. So if they don't have the power to make medical decisions for you, they don't have that power. They're exercising an illegal authority. Therefore, it's not made pursuant to the Constitution. Therefore, it is not the supreme law of the land. So Jen Psaki could go pound sand. But it gets better. Because if you look through the Constitution, you know what you won't find? You won't find occupational safety and health as a power delegated to the United States. So the legislation that created OSHA is not made pursuant to the Constitution. It's not the supreme law of the land. In fact, it's empty, it's void. But it gets even better than that. Because the other thing you won't find, one other thing you will find in the Constitution is the right for the United States to regulate labor. So the Department of Labor, of which OSHA is part of, was created by legislation made repugnant to the Constitution, is therefore empty and void. So no, the mandates are illegal. But here's the thing. The government cannot force you to take a vaccine. They can bully you, they can intimidate you, they can punish you, but they can't make you. I know that sounds odd, right? They can't make you. Let me tell you a story. I received my first ever federal subpoena. I was called to testify in a case in Arizona. And I called up the U.S. Attorney's office and I talked to a paralegal and, okay, we need you here on this date and yada, yada. I said, okay, we got to, says, you'll get a phone call from this person. She will set you up to fly you out here. I said, okay, but I'm not taking the shot. I'm not taking the COVID test, and I'm only going to wear a mask under duress. You know what they did? Next day, they called me back saying, you don't have to show up. We're canceling you as a witness. If you know your rights and you stand up for them, you stand a chance. But here's the problem. See, Benjamin Franklin, when they signed the Declaration of Independence, Benjamin Franklin stood up and said, gentlemen, we must all hang together, or assuredly we will all hang separately. The problem is, if you or I or anyone here stands up alone, you're an easy target. It's like a whack-a-mole with just one mole sticking up that never moves. But if there's a group, if we all hang together, we can make a difference. We can stand against what they're doing. Now, will some of us get beat up? Possibly. Will some of us get arrested? We've seen that already happen. But I always ask the question, what is your liberty worth? What is your what's your children's liberty worth? Or your grandchildren or your great-grandchildren? You know, I inherited a country freer than the one we have today. I've already given that as an example, right? But what I'm leaving to my daughter is I want to leave her a country that is freer than it is today. And the way we do that is by willing to say it's worth giving up a job. It's worth, when the end of the Declaration of Independence, it says, to this cause, we pledge to each other our lives, our fortunes, and our sacred honor. Well, okay. None of us wants to die for liberty, right? No one's ready to stand out. Give me liberty, give me death. No one's, I regret that I have but one life to give for my country, right? You don't want to die. You may be willing to die, but you don't want to die. But if you're going to give your life for liberty, what about living for liberty? What about living as a free citizen, not as a subject of a government? Your fortunes. All right, most of us probably don't have what we'd call a fortune. But where do you spend your money? You know, I'm traveling around. I go to all these places. I just got invited. Someone invited me to go out to lunch. I met him at the meeting last night. He said, where would you like to, he wants to take me out to lunch. I said, well, here's where I am. Where can we go? And he said, you'll like this place because they think the way I do. See, I think every small business that is tired of this mandate and the nonsense should get a big sign, plaster it in the window. We respect your rights. No mask, no vaccine, no problem. That's where I'm going to go. And our honor, this idea that do we actually have honor, a sacred honor, a trust that's been passed on to us that we pass on to the next generation. The honor to say, you know what, I will help you. I will stand with you during these fights. I may not be able to do everything you want, but what can we do to honorably support each other? So that's my little rant on mandates. And by the way, like I said, if I let me throw this other thing in. Anybody that comes at me with a needle is an imminent threat of death or serious bodily injury. Do you know why I use those words? Because in every state in the union, that is considered the criteria which you can use lethal force to defend yourself. You don't want to use lethal force. But if it's a question of getting a shot in the arm or defending myself, that I've made that decision. So more quick, yes.
So what's standing if somebody is given the option of taking a job or keeping their job? What standing do they have?
Well, it depends on whether they work for a private company or a public company. If it's owned by the government, if it was funded by the government, their answer is you don't have that right. You don't have the authority to tell me what to do. Right? I was talking to a gentleman the other day. He has to go to court. The court wants him to wear a mask. He says, "No, I'm not wearing a mask." They said, "Then you're in. Then you can't come into the court." But you've ordered me to show up to the court. Make up your mind. You can't deny. You can't demand me. You can't demand that I show. You cannot command my attendance and make me deny my own rights to do that. Sorry, you can't. Now, if it's a private business, they have every right to control who comes onto their property under what conditions. Now, the one place one thing you have in your favor, and this is, I'm not a lawyer, I don't play one on TV, but I've heard from lawyers that the one thing you don't want to do is quit. You want to be fired for two reasons. One, you've got a wrongful, you potentially have a wrongful termination suit. But think about it. If you have an employment contract, you have any sort of agreement, right? When I worked in corporate America, I signed an employment contract. It set conditions. Excuse me, you're changing the conditions of employment. You cannot do that unilaterally. That's a contract violation. I can sue the pants off you. And these companies need to have the pantsuit off them. Here's the other one. If you decide, you know what, that's not a hill I'm willing to die on. I completely understand. I'm not saying you should do this. Each and every one of us has to decide for ourselves what hill we'll die on. But let's say you do go and you decide, you know what, I'm gonna get the jab. Two things you need to know. The current vaccine, right? It's not a vaccine, but they call it a vaccine. All three of them available in the US are issued under an emergency use authorization. That's right. They say, oh, they've FDA approved Pfizer. No, they've approved the Comirnaty brand of the Pfizer, which Pfizer refuses to bring into the country as long as they still have the EUA for the other variant. Right? So it's an EUA, which means they're required by the law that establishes EUA process to tell you it's experimental, to give you a list of, to tell you all the benefits, all the risks, including just possible risks. You ever notice how after drug commercials, there's like 30 seconds of just yammering all the pots? There's an infinitesimal chance, but we have to tell you about it. They have to do that before they give you the shot. And they have to tell you that you have the right to refuse and tell you the consequences of refusing. So here's the dirty little secret that everybody's trying to play games with. I'm waiting for some smart person to figure this out and sue. If they require you to take an emergency use authorized drug, no, the drug not completely authorized by the FDA, not past all the FDA trials, the company is liable for any adverse reactions you have. Any. You feel sick for 3 days and you have to take off work, they owe you pay. You come down with a serious illness and you're in the hospital, they pay the bills. They are required by law to do that. Now, hang on a second. If you die, they're supposed to pay your family everything that you would make through the rest of your life plus damages. Now, yes, you are, right? But the point is, you let them know that you're taking on the liability for me taking an experimental drug. Now, they'll say, but the government said we can't be sued. That's baloney. That's a violation of the First Amendment. That's why I said you need a lawyer with a decent judge. Remember the judge that told Biden, no, you can't do the vaccine mandate, right? You need a judge to look at it and say, that's a violation of the First Amendment. That is they're depriving you of your right to petition government for redress of grievance. If nothing else, you've informed them of what could happen next. Understand, you give me that shot and I'm sick. I mean, I have the sniffles. I'm staying home and you got to pay me for it. I have any condition, you're paying for it. Do you really want that? Because understand, corporations, especially large corporations, have lots of lawyers and lawyers hate liability. You get the lawyers involved and say, you realize anything happens to me, we're suing the pants off of you. Lawyers get nervous. Now, some companies say we can absorb it, we're going to go ahead. But what we've done is we've informed them ahead of time so that if something happens, we can start dealing with it. We can start fulfilling that. I don't want to call it a threat. We can actually do what we said would happen. Does that make sense? Yes.
So I have a question. As far as these private companies, they can require anything they want. I dispute that because we have a 13th Amendment that applies to private citizens declaring ownership over other people, and that is not allowed.
You do not have a right to a job at a specific location.
They don't have the right to say that I must have something in my body. That is my
No, they're
body.
saying they're saying they're saying if you want this job, part of the conditions of employment are taking the jab. If you want to do business with us, if you want to come onto our property.
That wants to stop me from saying, hey, I'm not hiring any men. I'm not hiring any white people. I'm not hiring any black people. I'm not hiring any straight people. I'm not hiring any gay people. I could go nuts and say I'm not hiring anyone of that category of people. And who is to stop me? And why is this any different? How about disability? They are denying anybody medical exemptions. You know, it is like pulling teeth to get a medical exemption.
The answer to your first question.
Licenses. Thank you. Sorry. License.
The answer to the first question is constitutionally nothing. Understand, freedom means you have to allow other people to be stupid. You have to. They are not
independently deciding to be stupid, though. This is not independent. This is not organic. This is
not. Wait. Time out. Hang on just a second. I'm asked I was asked, what about these company requirements? Can the government tell the company required? Absolutely not.
That's what they're doing.
But it's the government that's doing wrong, not the private company.
The private company is not saying that's wrong sound. So they are, in my book, doing wrong.
That's their decision. That's their decision.
They are in on this.
But then again, that's my point. If you're going to have freedom, you have to allow them to be spineless cowards that do what they're told. That's called liberty. Right? So in other words, you're saying that you're saying that the government you're saying that the government you're saying that the government has the right to tell you who you can and cannot allow in your home. So what's the difference between private property that's yours and private property that's owned by a group of individuals? Doesn't matter. It's private. It's private property.
It absolutely matters. My home is my home.
And my home is my home, and my home is my office. It's private property. If it's not, but if that storefront is private, but that doesn't change it. Private property is private property. Otherwise, then you get to then it's no longer a question of.
This is not an accident. This is not an isolated incident.
I'm not talking about that. You asked a specific. You asked a specific question, and you don't like the answer. I'm sorry, but that's what the Constitution says. It says you cannot be deprived of property without due process of law. That includes my home. That includes the building where I have my business. That includes my business myself. That includes every job I offer is my property. And we can negotiate for whether or not you take that job under what conditions.
Try hiring employers and then putting on there, no Christians need apply. Try that.
I'm not saying, yeah, and but my point is the point is the law that created that. Listen, I know lots of people who are idiots, right? The idea that we are somehow by law going to get idiots to act like honest people doesn't work.
We just have to take away their effect on us. They can be idiots, they just don't get to affect us. You understand the clear line there?
The problem is, right? Yeah, no, there's no way to, then the only way to do that is you wrap yourself in bubble wrap, stick yourself in a corner, and nobody can affect you. That's not society. Everything everybody does affects things. The question then becomes, do you have the right to demand another private party do something for you? Right?
They're demanding money out of me. Why the hell?
No, they're not.
Yeah, they absolutely
they are not. They are saying this is a condition of employment. If you want to work here. All right, so you can have a choice here. You can either rant and rave about the process you don't like, or we can look at what the Constitution and the supreme law of the land says and figure out how to deal with it.
Paul, and if I may, I do have, I mean, I think she does have a fairly valid, I'm sitting here and I'm listening to y'all and I'm thinking about these people that own this private restaurant.
Mhm.
If she told me to leave because she doesn't like the color of my dress, I mean, she really can't do that.
Why not? I mean, you're using you're using the argument of the absurd, but
But the government has twisted things so convincingly that we believe all this stuff that she has the right to tell me to leave because it's private.
the government's actually gotten it backwards. You've actually got it backwards. See, there used to be signs in Windows. We reserve the right to refuse service. The government came up with this idea that, well, because you're open to the public, you're no longer really private. There's just one problem. They just stole the property of every business owner when they did that. Now, if let's say that happens, let's say the owner comes in and says, I don't like the color of your dress, I don't like the way you wear your hair, I don't like anything, and tells you to leave. Well, you know what's happening is, I don't know about the rest of you folks, but I'm walking out and I'm not paying a check. I don't want to give money to a business owner that would do something that stupid. So if you create a law that says she can't do that, she may still hate the color of your dress. She may still want to throw you out, but she's afraid that the government will come down on her. You're going to pay her to continue in that mindset, rather than saying, I will not do business with somebody who thinks that way. We're trying to get the government to take responsibility for what bothers us. My response to that is I walk out without paying the check. I refuse to do business with them again. I have places I refuse to do business with again, not because of something that trivial, but we have to. That's why I talk about pledging our fortunes. It means, you know, the biggest problem you have is, one of the great things about freedom of speech is you get to find out who the idiots are. When someone says something stupid, I don't want to shut them up. Continue, let everybody know just how stupid you are. But when we try to get government to bully people to act the way we want, there's nothing that stops them from bullying us to act the way somebody else wants. But if we understand freedom, then we turn around and said, listen, if let's say, all right, like I said, they walk out. Let's say I walk in here and say, I would like a job. And I find out they don't serve, I don't know, tall people. They don't serve women who are by themselves, unattended by a man. Like, I don't want to work for these idiots. I can find someplace else to work. That's my responsibility. They don't owe me a job, just like nobody I've ever worked for owed me a job. We negotiated a deal. I would do this work, they would pay me money. And we've been trained to think that somehow, by opening doors to the public, by selling shares on a public market, that somehow those entities are no longer private, they're somehow quasi-public, and therefore quasi-part of the government. Which means I'm a sole proprietor, I'm a small business owner. Tell me, at what point is this business no longer mine? Is it when I form an LLC? Is it when I have 100 employees? Is it when I have 1,000 employees?
How about when you achieve virtual monopoly power?
You know the only place you get monopolies? Government. Government has a monopoly on the use of, well, almost all the use for. Government is the one that creates monopolies by favoring certain vendors over others. We don't like the fact that Facebook, YouTube, Google are so big, but they're so big because they offer a service. Why? Because you realize that if you didn't allow Google and Facebook to grow so large, we wouldn't have the YouTube we have today.
The YouTube we have today is shit. Sorry.
Then what do you care? Then what do you care? If you don't like it, don't use it. What do you care? But they don't have a monopoly. There are competitors to YouTube. They're not as big yet, but they're growing.
What about when they conspire with the government to get rid of the competitors?
That's my point. You've got government involved. They're using government to bully people to do what they want, which really is no different than saying, I want, you know. Right. When I'm old enough to remember a little bit of segregation, right? Just a little bit. I was born in the 60s and I lived in New York City, so we didn't have a lot of that, but there was still segregation in this country. And the government got the brilliant idea that said, that's wrong. I absolutely agree. I absolutely agree. That's wrong. But they said, we're going to force you, business owner, to not be a bigot. You can't. You haven't changed their heart. You haven't changed their mind. All you're saying is, okay, now I can hide my bigotry and I can take money from all my customers because I'm not acting like a big hourly. I'm just going to go put on a hood and burn crosses in my spare time. Right? It's the idea that we can tell someone else how to live their life is not simply a slippery slope. It is the very basis of totalitarian governments. Some group wants the ability to tell some other group how to live their life. We may not like how they live. Trust me, I know lots of people. I think they're nuts. I don't want to, right? But that doesn't mean I have the right to tell them they can't. I use an example. I usually use this example in the thing, but I'll tell you, helmet laws. Now, there's nothing in the Constitution that says you can have a helmet law, even a state helmet law. But there is no way on God's green earth I'm getting anywhere near a motorcycle without a helmet on. Does that mean I have the right to tell everybody else to wear a helmet? No. We can use the argument of the absurd or the argument of the corner case, but ultimately the question comes down to, do you claim the authority to tell someone else how to live their life? Because as soon as you do that, yeah, because it deprives you of because the state is depriving you of liberty and property without due process of law, but that's a violation of the 14th Amendment, which is the Constitution is the supreme law of the land. It violates the 14th Amendment, the due process clause of the 14th Amendment. Same thing. Again, I wouldn't get in a car without a seatbelt, but the ability to tell someone else, because it was doing it. I believe most of them were attempts to do the right thing. So they saw an evil that they wanted to rectify. The problem is we don't always agree on what that evil is. And now what we've done is we've created a government that believes they can tell us how to do everything. It tells us how much water can use in our toilet. It tells us what kind of light bulbs we can use. It tells us what kind of detergent we can use. It tells us what can be in our clothes. It tells us that we can't drink raw milk because it's bad for us. And then it tells us we need to take an experimental drug. But it's all on a spectrum from, we know better than you do, therefore, we're going to tell you how to live. Hang on a second. I know I got a question here. Yes, Jasper. The question Jasper had was, isn't OSHA depriving property without due process of law with the fines? Probably not, but it's a bunch of BS for sure. Actually, OSHA is depriving, it's not simply the fines. OSHA is depriving the business owner of the control of their business without due process of law, because they haven't shown that this is necessary for society to survive. That's the definition of liberty, which I'll get into a little bit later. But it's not simply that they're depriving them of money, it's that they are depriving them of the property, the control of their property. Okay. More questions. Okay, yes.
Just to let everybody know, I joined the thing called the Truth and Liberty Coalition.
Mm-hmm.
It's an awesome.
Right.
You can get Truth and Liberty Coalition. They have attorneys. We sit in this company and stuff about power. These people have attorneys and they really get to
Okay, so just because I've got people online. Yep. Okay.
All kinds of stuff. Today they came out with all the stuff they're not telling us about how many people died.
So for, all right, so for everyone online, Dylan is talking about, he's part of a group called Truth for Liberty, Truth and Liberty Coalitions. And it's what, .org? Okay, just search for it. Yeah. Truth and Liberty Coalition. I guess it's a group of lawyers that have been debating and putting out some good information.
It's a political, real one. It's a 501c4. They're able to do more than C3. It's Christians and politicians and stuff like that. With lawyers, and figure out how to stop it.
Right. So it's great. The comment came in talking about one of the things OSHA said they're not going to do is they told businesses don't report your adverse reactions. Wait a second, they're by law required to report that. No, don't do that because we don't want people to not take the jab. So we don't want to give them informed consent, which means they can't inform them of the potential dangers because they're not being reported. This is. Okay. Question. Hang on a second. I got one.
How does that work like an at-will state?
It depends on whether or not you have an employment contract, a verbal contract or a written contract, right? So the question was, what if you're in like an at-will state? And it's less a question of the state. If you enter into employment and you have a contract, now there's a verbal contract, which is really hard to enforce. There's a written contract that's really much easier to enforce. And the point is that the written contract that says, here's what the employer is going to do, here's what the employee is going to do, and it could be things like pass a drug test, show up 40 hours a week, all that stuff. They're changing the contract with without the agreement of the other party. That's a violation of contract law, right? Now, technically what they could do is just say, when your contract expires and it's time to renew the contract, they just won't renew you, right? But it gets, and I'm not a lawyer, but that basic contract law is, if we have a contract, one side cannot unilaterally change the contract without the agreement of the other. Yes, ma'am.
27 states are suing what a mandate against mandate.
Mm-hmm.
Is the point to eventually consolidate and go to the Supreme Court to rule the Constitution?
Okay, yep. So the question was about the 27 states that are currently suing the Biden administration over the vaccine mandate. And yes, I believe their end goal is to have this mandate found unconstitutional. The Supreme Court doesn't rule. Federal courts don't rule, they opine, right? They aren't our kings, they don't rule. They act like it, but they don't. But they want the Supreme Court to say it's unconstitutional. But here's my question. I have no problem with state entities suing the federal government. They are petitioning the federal government for a redress of a grievance. Cool. The states are begging the federal government to protect them from the federal government because they're suing in federal court. Federal courts are they're part of the federal government. They're created with the same constitution. They are just as bad, if not worse, in violating that constitution. So you have a state entity that's begging the federal government to protect them from the federal government. Let me tell you a story. When I was writing my book, I went and I searched, I found a website that listed all of the executive departments and agencies. There's over 650 on the list. Well, there was a lot of duplications, right? They'd have Department of Defense and Defense Departments. I weeded out the duplicates. And there was a bunch of stupid ones I weeded out to come up with the list of what's actually there. Do you realize that in that list, the federal government listed as a department of the executive branch, all 50 states? The federal government thinks Florida is a vassal of Washington, D.C. See, my point is, these 27 states, they can sue to get the opinion. They don't need to. They have the legitimate authority to say, no, the 10th Amendment says this power, we have to delegate this power to you. We did not delegate this power to you. You cannot do this in our state. If you send anyone here into our state to enforce it, we will arrest them, charge them with whatever crimes they're committing of fraud, extortion, whatever. And if they're found guilty, we will fine them or jail them. The states can tell Biden and his cronies to go pound sand. They're afraid. Do you know why they're afraid? The gravy train. See, they have been bribed by government money, by federal money. Well, don't feel bad. You've all been bribed by federal money too. So I can pretty much guarantee you have voted for someone because of a program they supported. At some point in your life, you took government money, federal money for something that they were not authorized to do. Don't feel bad. I've done it too. I'm not saying I'm innocent in this. But once we recognize that, wait a second, we're being bribed. This Build Back Better is a ginormous, it is a 1 point, depending on who you talk to, somewhere between 1.7 and $4 trillion bribe of the American people. And most of them are taking it.
And it's the point of the lawsuit to go to all places for courts to get data where the government would not be able to penalize them by very much.
No, the point,
Constitutional and everybody.
so the question is, what's the point of the lawsuit? The point of the lawsuit really is, understand, most politicians were lawyers, and lawyers went to law school. And law schools do not teach what the Constitution says. They do not teach the Constitution. They teach something called constitutional law, which is a judge's opinions about the Constitution. So all of these attorneys general are all lawyers that went to law school that believe that whatever the federal government says goes. So their only redress is to beg the federal government to ease their pain. They don't know any better. And I'll give you a perfect example. When after the 2020 election, when we found there were 5 states that Attorney General Paxton from Texas said they violated the Constitution. He filed a lawsuit at the Supreme Court. And I read his complaint. And his complaint basically was, listen, there was fraud, there was malfeasance, there was all this stuff. And oh, by the way, they violated the Constitution. Literally, he gave them a bowl of pasta that big and one itty bitty little meatball. He buried his one true argument. 5 states appointed electors in a manner different than the one approved by their legislature. A violation of Article 2, Section 2 of the US Constitution. A criminal act. And he buried it in noise and nonsense. And then he had the temerity to say, one of the problems is you have state courts determining how to appoint presidential electors. Supreme Court, tell those states how to appoint presidential electors. He asked the Supreme Court to do exactly what he was complaining. It was heartbreaking how stupid this was. But he's a lawyer, so he looked at it from constitutional law, and here's how he never looked at the one pure golden fact. 5 states, Supreme Court, 5 states appointed electors in a manner contrary to the Constitution. Here's evidence for each of the 5. This one did it by the legislature, this one did it by the courts, this one did it by the executive branch, this one did both, right? We want your opinion. Did that violate the Constitution or not? Now, why would that be important? Because once he did that, on January 6th, when Congress came to count the certificates from the states, and one of those states' certificate came up, legislature, excuse me, Mr. President, because the vice president is the president of the Senate, right? I object to that being counted because those electors were not legally appointed, and this is supported by the Supreme Court opinion on this. We cannot count that certificate. I object to counting that certificate. Now, here's the interesting thing. I did the math. So there's a couple interesting tweaks. So if, let's say you had a state with 20 electors that they said they were not legally appointed. All right, so there's now 20 fewer electors in the quote unquote electoral college. There is no real electoral college as a term, right? Well, if they remove 20 electors, the total number to win drops by 10, right? Because it's the majority of electors appointed. If they were not legally appointed, they weren't appointed, they don't have to win a majority of them. So I went through and I added up all the electors for all of these illegally appointed positions, and I subtracted them from the 538, and I came up with what is the magic number, and I figured out how many votes Biden would have won. Biden would have won by 1 electoral college vote. But if they had removed those 5. Now there's lots of malfeasance showing up in lots of other states, and those states need to deal with that. But we have to remember that the attorneys that are in all of these governmental positions, most of them don't know what the Constitution actually says. And it's actually kind of funny when you can walk up to one and educate them. All right, people on Zoom, I'm gonna ask you to call out because I'm having a hard time keeping up with all the questions. So on Zoom, if you have a question, sing out, let me know. I don't have anything on the others, so
Hey, it's Andy. Do you mind if I say something?
Yeah. Go ahead, Andy.
Okay, sorry. I don't know if you can hear me or if everyone can hear me.
Just me.
Okay. I had a border question. Is a border wall legitimate if Congress takes an oath to defend against it, against foreign enemies? Is considered an invasion?
Interesting question. So the question is about a border wall, and is it legitimate? And is Congress violating their oath by not funding it? Now, this gets into a very interesting question, because if you read the Constitution, the federal government doesn't have the power to regulate immigration. They can set rules for naturalization, but not immigration. So they can they can say, well, these are the standards for having a citizen, but it's really the state's job to say, who are we going to allow in and not, right? Now, I want to make sure I get this right. So the real question, I want to make sure I get the right reference.
Sorry, that was kind of complex.
Yeah. No, that's okay. I need to look something up. So Article 1, Section 9, Clause 2 of the Constitution says, the writ of habeas corpus shall not be suspended unless in cases of, that's the one I'm looking for. Hang on, I got the wrong quote. That's why I wanted to look it up. Oh, there we go. So it's Article 4, Section 4. The United States shall guarantee to every state in this union a republican form of government and shall protect each of them against invasion. The question becomes, when does illegal immigration become invasion? That I don't have a good answer for. Right? I actually haven't, because it becomes a semantic term. And, you know, okay, is 1,000 migrants an invasion? If they come over one at a time, if they all come at once, at what point does it become an invasion? That I don't know.
I just heard somebody talk about that. The communities are so overwhelmed they can't provide.
The problem is that's not a
If they can't get food and water, there's kids literally dying.
but that's not a legal definition of invasion. All right, that's not a legal. That
That's the people already living there already.
again, that I don't know that that's a legal definition of invasion, because take for example, okay, well let's take to me, I think invasion is probably based more on intent of the invader. Right. So for example, when
Essentially taking over private farms.
yes, so
And they're causing harm to the owners and the occupants.
well, all right, so let me make sure I get the people online. So yes, so the point was, if they are invading private property, that's a crime, right? If they are taking over private property, maybe. All right. The point is an invasion, as I understand. Again, I haven't done a lot of deep research on this, but to me the invasion is I'm coming over to change you. Right. It's one thing, for example, when when Cubans jumped on rafts and headed for Miami, it got called the Cuban invasion. It got called invasion a lot, but it wasn't really an invasion. They were fleeing for their lives, and they came to us for help, right? And in many cases, you might say there are some from Mexico that are fleeing for their lives and looking for help. I don't think we would generally call that an invasion from a legal standpoint. But when you have a criminal element that's trying to, well, not so much the coyotes, I'm thinking of the cartels, right? When the cartels are coming in and they are supplanting the legitimate government, that is an invasion. And the federal government is required by the Constitution to repel that invasion.
Okay, so I was born in Miami,
Mm-hmm.
and it has been about 40 years since I've been able to get a job in Miami because I do no longer speak the language. Is that not an invasion? I mean, you're affecting the economy of people who are naturally born here.
Again, I haven't done the detailed research, but the fact that things change doesn't necessarily mean it's an invasion.
Your home is not your home.
Well, for example, she was talking not about taking your home, right? So where I used to live in upstate New York, we had people that from New York City that would move in. They would buy summer homes, they'd buy weekend homes, and there are two types of people that used to move in. You had the vacationers, and you had what I collectively refer to as the cityites. Vacationers, they would come, they would enjoy the clean air, they would enjoy the scenery, they would become part of the community. The cityites tried to turn us into a little New York City, right? So the question comes down to, again, it becomes down to not necessarily numbers necessarily, but intent. But again, I can't say that with 100% certainty because I'm looking at the illegal, I'm looking for a legal definition, not simply an emotional one or one that is, we don't like this, it's an invasion versus, all right, what's the actual legal thing that we could actually use to say, excuse me, you're required to repel them. No, there is none.
Just the simple, we give them free education, give them free housing, give them free food, give them free, I mean, everything. I mean, where did I consent to giving my money to people that aren't really here?
Let me back that up. All right, so the question was about payment, paying money to illegals. It's actually much worse than that, because the federal government is not authorized to pay for your education. They're not supposed. The federal government, the Congress is allowed to collect taxes for only three reasons: to pay the debts of the United States, to provide the common defense, and for the general welfare of the federal government. It's phrased the general welfare of the United States, capital U, capital S, proper noun for the Union of States and its government.
But I'm saying our school, so I know we get federal funds to say our local schools. So the taxpayers pay into the local schools.
But when the federal government, wait, you didn't say it was legal for the federal government to pay for your public schools. We did not consent to that. So, the problem is much worse than just saying, oh, we have people here illegally that are consuming that. We walked away from the legal restrictions on Congress decades ago, right? The Department of Education is illegal. It's null, it's void, it's empty. Right? So it's not simply a question of Congress is not allowed to spend money on, I don't remember the exact number, but I remember reading an article. If you take the federal budget, was it now almost $6 trillion? At the time it was $4 trillion. if you didn't change the tax code one lickety bit, but all you did is the federal government spent money it was authorized to spend by the Constitution, they would have paid off the debt in 10 years. Right? 90 plus, probably 90 somewhere, I think I want to say 90, but I don't remember that's the number, percent of what the federal government spends your tax money, takes money from you to spend on, is not authorized, is therefore illegal. Now, what do you call it when I take money from you without your authorization and give it to someone else? Embezzlement. Right? But as Alexis de Tocqueville said, this republic will stand until the Congress figures out it can bribe the people with the people's money. So, you know, it's like I said, it's worse than that. It's not simply that they're paying for the tuition for the schools for illegals. We didn't authorize them to pay that money, period. So
we should have planned better for retirement. We're running out of roads, running out of money. People pay this too. You know, like, you never hear of us running out of money. How much are we taking?
yep. So
All these we're gonna take our seniors who pay into the system and say, well, you know what, you should have planned better. Oh, inflation, you know, suck it up. You should have had a better
talking about so let me ask you this. You know who your representatives in the House of Representatives, right? Have they voted for any spending bills for stuff that wasn't authorized by the Constitution?
Yes.
Oh, absolutely.
It's your fault.
I didn't vote for him.
Doesn't matter. He's your employee. You didn't win the vote, but he's the employee of all the citizens in this district, of all the people in this district. And the government cannot spend a dime unless it's appropriated by Congress, and all appropriations bills start in the House. Now, here's a problem. Social Security is a scam. It's a Ponzi scheme. If it was done by anybody but the government, they'd be in jail. They make Bernie Madoff look like a saint. But we authorize this because government said, we will give you something. And we said, sure, here you go. We'll give up all of our rights, all of our control, all of our power. Just give us something. Okay, let me just check for a question here. Invasion when one comes through. So the one statement here was invasion when one comes not through the channels. The problem then is you're telling me that every individual that crosses the border illegally is an invasion. I don't know that holds up to legal standard. It's something, if I get a chance, I'll have to look a little deeper into it. But it's one of those things where it's the definition of invasion that gets real interesting. Did you have something?
Yeah, if this is an act of maladministration for the President of the United States to let our border be filled and run over with these illegals, this is illegal. There is no defense for this behavior.
No, so.
And regarding the common defense and the general welfare, the Constitution says that we shall provide for the common defense, but it does not say we shall provide the general welfare. It says we shall promote the general
You're
welfare.
talking about the preamble, which is not a legally binding part of the Constitution. The true general welfare clause comes from Article 1, Section 8, Clause 1.
It demonstrates intent.
But my point is, it's the general welfare of the United States. Everyone says the general welfare. It does not say that. It says the general welfare of the United States. Capital U, capital S.
Promoted, not promoted.
No. That's the preamble. The legal Congress is authorized to collect taxes, to pay the debts, provide for the common defense, and the general welfare of the United States.
What does it say?
That's Article 1, Section. That's Article 1, Section 8, Clause 1.
It does not say promote.
That's in the preamble.
Yeah, I know, but it doesn't say it there.
Did you say which section?
Article 1, Section 8, Clause 1.
Section 8, clause 1.
Everyone here is pulling out their pocket. I love how many people have their pocket constitutions to pull out.
I have 3.
Article 1, Section 8, Clause 1. The Congress shall have the power to lay and collect taxes, duties, imposts and excises to pay the debts, provide for the general wealth, provide for the common defense and general welfare of the United States. So the preamble's an introduction, and you're right.
And general welfare. But when it was referring to common defense, it said provide. But right there,
It
just
says, no,
and.
it says provide for the common defense and general welfare of the United States. So the problem you have is if you go off the preamble, it just says to promote the general welfare, which is the intent. But the actual legally binding language on Congress says you will provide for the common defense and the general welfare of the United States. And I'm going to keep pounding that in because it's the proper noun for the union. It means they have to have courts, right? We have a federal court system. So they have to pay judges. They're required to pay judges, right? They're allowed to own needful buildings like courthouses. So they have to pay for that. That's the general welfare of the United States. It doesn't say the general welfare of the citizens. It doesn't say the general welfare of the several states. It's the general welfare, basically, of the federal government. It's the fact that most people misuse the general welfare clause as an excuse for Congress to do whatever it wants. If you read James Madison in Federalist Paper 65, I'm not sure, you'll find that he said, no, the general welfare doesn't mean whatever Congress wants. General welfare, this is a general clause that says, yes, the general welfare of the United States, and here are the specific things you can do.
I know with my company, they use things you said in the beginning about how we've been told not to quit. Well, the way my company's done it, if you don't get the shot by a certain date, they're taking that as a resignation.
You can take, you know what? All right. So Abraham Lincoln walked into his cabinet one day and said, if you have an elephant and I consider the trunk a leg, how many legs does an elephant have? Everyone said 5. You know what Lincoln said? 4. Just because you call it a leg doesn't make it a leg. Just because you say, oh, we consider that a resignation. I did not resign. I did not. And I would take him and I'd find a good lawyer and take him to court on it. And there are pro bono law firms that are helping with these cases. Yeah. There's one, the truth and liberty. Okay, let me get a chance for online. We got anything online? A good question.
Yeah, hey, I got one.
Okay.
So are we subject to every law the federal government makes?
Are we subject to every law the government makes? Well, that depends on whether or not you subject yourself to it. See, if the law is not, and Tunnel Alert, I know you're setting me up for something.
Yeah.
It's something I'm going to teach these people in a minute, but I know there's one guy, his nickname is his handle is Tunnel Lord. And there's, he likes to set me up for stuff like this.
Help you out and help the crowd out.
Yeah, he's my straight man. So Alexander Hamilton in Federalist Paper number 78 said, I'm not gonna be able to quote this verbatim. He said, any act of a delegated authority contrary to the tenor of the commission under which it was exercised is void. Put another way, in the Marbury versus Madison case, an act of the legislature repugnant to the Constitution is void. Meaning, when Congress acts in a manner contrary to the Constitution, contrary to its commission, that act is empty. It's meaningless. We are not subject to it unless we subject ourselves. I use the example of the Hans Christian Andersen story of the Emperor's Clothes. Remember the story? They con man, get him to wear nothing and tell him it's fine clothes, so great, only special people can see it. And everybody went along with it, right? He's strutting through town naked as a jaybird. And everyone's going, ooh, well, we can't tell him he's wrong. We can't tell him he's wrong. And he got away with it. Until one kid pointed and said, he's naked. That's my job. I'm the little boy going, no, he's naked. That law is empty. That's meaningless. It's vapid. But you see, they're really good at bullying you and intimidating you into coercion. That's what government's come. It's because it's a bully.
but it doesn't do any good if you can't enforce it. And this is the problem. This is our enigma. This is what everybody wants. Let's enforce what we know to be so.
So earlier this year, I think it was earlier this year, I saw two videos on YouTube. One was a lady in Texas. She's outdoors. She's watching her son play some sort of sporting event. She's on a set of bleachers. Her mother's sitting next to her, but she's 20 feet from anybody else. Outdoors, well separated, not wearing a mask. Guy shows up with a badge on one shoulder and a chip on the other, tells her to wear a mask. She refuses. He attempts to arrest her. She resists, screaming she's not doing anything wrong. He tases her, handcuffs her, and drags her out. Now, similar time frame. I believe it was a restaurant in Buffalo, New York. Health inspector comes in with two deputies. Owner says, "Where's your warrant?" She goes, "I don't need a warrant." She says, "Oh, yes, you do." She says, "No, I don't. Doesn't matter. You're from the gate. You need a warrant. You're not welcome here. You are trespassing. Leave." Back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. At one point, one of the deputies looks at the guy and says, "Dude, we're just trying to do our job." He says, "No, if you were doing your job, you would be arresting the trespasser." Back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. Health inspector and the deputies leave. What's different between Texas and Buffalo? In Texas, when she was assaulted by an officer of the law, everybody looked almost either they watched the video or they looked away in shame. Not one person rose to her defense. In Buffalo, when this guy stood up against the bullies from government, everybody stood up for his defense. You can hear them. "No, go away. You're not wanted. Leave." Who won the day? If we don't hang together, we will all hang separately. Who here's watched the videos of Attila's Gym in New Jersey? Tell me, is there a video that doesn't have 200 people behind them cheering them on?
Hey, we had thousands on January 6th, and look what happened.
And how many of those people when and how many people, because you notice they didn't arrest them on January 6th, did they? No. When they isolated them, and who came to their defense? Who there is outside the jail demanding proper treatment for the prisoners? Who there is demanding? Which governor says you are illegally holding my citizens?
One representative, Marjorie Taylor Greene.
Actually, there was a second one. But here's the thing. Congress doesn't have investigatory powers. Not legally, not according to the Constitution. They have legislative powers. Police executive powers belong to the president. But understand, you have citizens of Florida that are currently being illegally held in DC. They're being held with cruel and unusual punishment. Tell me, where is Governor DeSantis sending his militia to the DC jail going, "You will release my prisoners and you will face criminal charges for the abuse you've committed on them"?
He's afraid, obviously.
Yeah.
All of our congressmen call Congress and Senate and go stand outside of that federal prison, stop everything until those people are released. Nobody's done it. To me,
We
Yeah,
talk about the Constitution and all of our constitutionally protected rights and everything, but where is the Fifth Amendment?
What do you mean?
Because where is it? Why is it not being used? Why is it not being implemented? Why is it not being?
Because
passed?
you're too ignorant and you don't know how to enforce it.
Tunnel Lord just stole my thought.
That's what she's talking about.
So understand, the Fifth Amendment, like the rest of the Constitution, is ink on parchment. It's not going to jump up, put a cape on, and suddenly become a Marvel superhero. It is there for us to use, and we don't use it. It is there for us to stand up and say, no. And again, if I do it by myself, I'm dead. But if I do it with a group, we have to enforce it. We have to hire people.
We have tried to educate people on it, especially.
Mhm.
We get police called on us by rhino clubs. We get thrown out of clubs. We count on people like you and Christiane Hall who are teaching the Constitution, but this is never taught. And this is our weapon against the government.
You're talking specifically to the grand jury.
Absolutely.
Yep. I got an interesting, I actually just started working with somebody who's got some interesting material on the grand jury that I'm going to follow up with, because I've always said, I've said I'm always open to new ideas. And he made a statement that's very interesting that I want to follow up with. And you know, of course, the stuff you were sending me, a lot of it is ignorance. Let's face it, 99% of the country knows diddly about the Constitution.
Especially those who vow to uphold it.
But remember, the people hired those representatives. That is the thing we have to pound it. See, the problem, as I see it, is twofold. Problem number one, we keep expecting someone else to come save us, right? Rather than saving ourselves. When I talk about living for pledging my life to liberty, I'm talking about living as a free citizen, not asking someone to protect my rights. I will defend my rights. Now, I do ask for people to help me. So I met with my sheriff. I confused the poor man because I wasn't there complaining. I wasn't there begging. I want to talk to you. I want to know who you are before we get into the campaign season. And we sat in his office, a very nice conversation. At one point, I looked at him and said, here, this is what I want. There is something, this is what I want. When I pick up the phone and dial 911 and one of your deputies shows up, I want to know that they've been trained that their primary responsibility is to protect the rights of everyone involved. He said, absolutely. I said, you're sure? They've been trained. They know they're not there to enforce the law first. They're to protect rights first. Laws second. He goes, yes. I said, if that's true, what can I do to help you? Do you want me to help train I'm a scholar. Do you want me to help train your deputies? I'll be more than happy to come in for free and do training classes. Do you want me to write a position paper proving how we were talking at the time about, I talked to him again later about the Biden's door knocking. I said, you want me to have a position paper so that if you arrest, someone door knocking for trespass, I asked us to, someone knocks on the door, says, just give us a call. We'll take away trespassing, no problem. It sounded like he was taking out the trash. It was hilarious. I said, do you need a position paper? Do you need someone with you at a press conference? Do you need someone to testify in front of a committee? You cover my back, I will cover yours. The biggest problem we have is we keep begging other people to protect our rights and then sit back and expect it to happen without doing anything about it. That's problem number one. Problem number two is the vast majority of Americans are constitutionally illiterate. They don't know what most of it says. Even worse, a lot of what they believe it says is actually wrong. I talked about the presidential electors and after the election, I was on a conference call with people dealing with the problem in one of those 5 states. I won't tell you which. One of those 5 states. One of the people on the call was not only a constitutional lawyer, but one who had been specializing in the Electoral College for 10 years. At one point during the conversation, I mentioned, hey, if this state, that's where I get the number 20, if you can invalidate the appointment of those electors, then what does that do to the vote? She goes, well, it would send it to the House of Representatives. I go, why? She says, there's not 270 votes. I said, you don't need 270 then. See, your state had gone to Biden, which means he got all 20 of those electors. But when you remove those electors, guess what happens? It goes from 270 to 210. She goes, no, it doesn't. It's 270. It's a majority of the electors. I go, no, it's the majority of the electors appointed. And I actually had to go to the Constitution and point it out to her. Now, I'm not picking on her. She's a very smart woman. She's a great attorney, but she never thought of it that way. We don't know everything. But she thought that 270 was a magic number, not realizing there was actually something else. Let me ask you 3 questions. I do this class, but I'll do the pre version. Let me ask you 3 questions. True or false? Federal judges serve lifetime appointments.
No. We've been led to believe that they do, but no, they don't.
How long I gotta know, how long do they serve?
Until they.
Article 1, Section 3, Article 3, Section 1, Section 2. They serve during their good behavior.
Yes.
Federal judges serve during good behavior. That's not in the Constitution. What? No. Okay, hang on. Question number 2. Why did I draw a blank on question number 2? Question was, well, I'll do this one. Question number 2. Last election, how many of you voted for, I don't care who you voted for, how many of you voted for President of the United States? None of you did. You voted for electors for President of the United States. Huh? You voted for electors for President of the United States. You didn't vote for a candidate. You said, I'm voting for an elector that's pledged to vote for that. Right? If you look at your ballot very closely, it should say electors for candidate so-and-so. Right? Little thing, but it's a very important thing. Why am I drawing a blank on the third question? It'll probably come to me when we're all done. Yeah, it's the electors. It is that. Oh, I know what it is. True or false? The federal government is made up of 3 co-equal branches.
4.
Nope. It's 3. They're not, but they're not equal. Almost all of the powers delegated to the United States are delegated to Congress. And of those powers, one of the most powerful, the power of the purse, is delegated primarily to our representatives in the House. But you see, we've all been taught, 3 co-equal branches of government. We don't know this, which means we make assumptions, we make bad decisions. So how do we fix these 2 things? There's a lot of things you can do, and I bet you got a lot of ideas. Some of them maybe I agree with, some maybe I don't. But whatever those ideas are, there needs to be, I believe there needs to be a foundation, a bedrock foundation to build that on. And that foundation is education. It's why I am here tonight, rather than back home, spending time with my family, petting my dog, because education is so important. It's one of the reasons why when I come to these events, somebody asked me about this, I think it was earlier today. I don't charge to come out and do these things. Someone was generous enough to lend me a guest apartment so I could stay here without paying for a hotel. I'm here for 3 days because they put me up for 3 days. I arrived Tuesday, I'm leaving tomorrow. So I don't have to charge for this stuff. I sold books. That pays for my gas. That pays to buy more material. That pays for my website. It pays for all of this stuff. Because I think it's that important. People tell me I am nuts. I should be charging 500, well, a group this size, I've charged a couple of $100 to come talk to a group this size. I said, no, I don't want someone to not get this simply because they can't afford to pay for me to come. My website, Constitution Study, everything on there is free. I do an article, a video, a podcast. Every week, I answer questions. You go up there, you just ask a question for free. Constitution, there's a pamphlet right there. It's constitutionstudy.com. Everything there is free for you to use. Everything there is free to you to share. In fact, I ask you, please share this with others for that very reason. Right? I think no matter what your passion is, let's start with making sure that we educate, that we have other people, we help them read and study the Constitution so that they will recognize when their rights are being violated and they will know how to defend themselves. Let's help them to teach the rising generation so that they can be free. That's what gets me going. All right, so we got
well, I think is the president or Andy, do you have anything?
Books are for sale online, right?
Go ahead if
I'm
you have
still
something.
online.
I have stuff.
Yes, I got a
Go
bug in
ahead.
my ear while
I just want to make sure we can buy the books online.
oh yes, here's the deal. If you buy them online, I charge you $5 to ship. No matter how many you book, I charge you $5 to ship. If you buy them here, you don't pay the shipping. I'm sorry, was there a question on Zoom there?
Yeah. Is the president some sort of king?
Is the president some sort of king? Well, are you talking legally or practically? Legally, no. Practically, he acts like one. And just like the emperor has no clothes, we keep letting him get away with it. Do you realize? Do you know what the president is constitutionally authorized to do all by his lonesome? There actually aren't very many things the president can do all on his own. He can pardon. He can receive foreign dignitaries. He can call a special session of Congress under emergency circumstances. And if the houses of Congress can't agree on when to go into recess, because they can't recess unless they both agree, he can tell them when to recess. Nope. Nothing else. The president there's not anything else. War, declaring war is Congress. All right. Because Congress doesn't hold them accountable, because our employees, think of Congress, both houses, as our employees. We vote for them all in. They're our employees. Every 2 years, think of it as a job review. And I have one question above all. Did you fulfill your oath of office to support the Constitution of the United States? They are required by the Constitution to have that in their oath, to swear or affirm that they will support. Have you done that? If you can't do that, I don't care who you are. I don't care what party you're in. I cannot vote for you. How can you tell when a politician is lying? What does it say about us that we continually hire people we know are lying to us, and the ones that do it the best are the ones we keep hiring the most? We keep them around the longest.
What option do we have?
Find better candidates. Stop focusing on the parties. Find better individuals.
The problem is the party funds the candidate. Yeah, Republican parties are enemy.
That explains why other people vote for him, not why you vote for him.
I understood that.
Right? The problem is, I mean, there are a lot of problems. George Washington warned us in his farewell address. He said, the dissension natural to party, the animosity natural to party dissension is its own frightful despotism. Now, later on, he goes on to say, what will happen is one man, either by luck or by intrigue, will assume the powers, and everyone will look to him to solve all your problems. Does that sound like Biden? Does that sound like Trump? How many people are looking for Trump to save the day? Right? I was at the meeting last night. You can back me up. The meeting last night, in the middle of that meeting, I was talking at a very similar point, and one guy stood up and he said, I just got to say this. He said, he's been arrested. He's had his job, his business closed. He and his family have been harassed. He's now running for Congress. And he said, I agree. He agreed with everything I was saying. He says, and I will fight with you. And we ended up in the conversation, a crowd, a couple hundred people, right? And we're having this conversation. He goes, I agree. That's what we have to do. And I was saying, so you're going to tell me you're not going to vote for legislation unless it's 100% constitutional. That's what I want to do. He says, the question is, okay, now how many of you are going to support him? I don't mean vote for him. I mean support him. Because if he does what he says he's going to do, he's going to be pilloried in the media. How many of you are going to support him? How many of you are going to worry more about what he's actually doing than what party he's in? See, part of the problem is we've allowed the political parties to run the system. Let me ask you a question. Let's say Governor DeSantis, now I'm not saying he wouldn't, but let's say Governor DeSantis, now we are going to hold biannual elections to elect the board for the NRA and the NAACP. Excuse me, what would be your reaction to that? Huh?
You can't do that.
Well, then why can your tax dollars be paid to run an election for a private corporation because it happens to be called the DNC or the RNC? Those are private corporations. I think they're 501c4s or C3s. I don't remember which. They're private corporations, yet your tax dollars pay for their election. And guess what? You know what those elections do? They're designed to limit your choices of who you can vote for. You look at the field and say, I want to vote for this. The Democrats have been an example of this for the last two presidential elections. Two presidential elections in a row. The far and away favorite among the people of the Democratic Party was Bernie Sanders. And the party played games and got to, no, you cannot vote. Well, technically you can, but what they do, they're trying to limit your vote to column A, column B. Oh, sure, maybe there's a column C or D. You can't vote. Any vote for them is a wasted vote. Heard that? The system is designed to focus you in and keep the parties, the two main parties, in power. Everyone focuses on gerrymandering. That's peanuts compared to the way the parties are run. So, okay, any more questions? I'm not seeing any in the chat. Okay, well, hang on a second, Tunnel Lord. I got it down here. Oh, okay. I got someone bringing me something to read here.
It's got two bad criminal things.
This is what I just want to kind of, it is Article 1, Section 6. Senators and representatives shall receive a compensation for the services to be ascertained by law and paid out of the Treasury of the United States. They shall, in all cases except treason, felony, and breach of the peace, be privileged from arrest during their attendance at the session of their respective houses, and in going to and returning from the same, and for any speech or debate in either house, they shall not be questioned in any other place. Is that what you're talking about? Okay, what's your question? Okay, that's okay. Very good point. I want to relate this to something else, right? Because they are related. The seat of the federal government is not allowed to be within any one state, right? It has to be a territory, a district set aside by states. That's why DC is not a state. It's why it doesn't have a voting member in the House of Representatives. It's why it did not have electoral college votes until we changed that. For one very simple reason. We didn't want a state to have undue influence over the federal government, right? Just imagine, right? Imagine, when they first formed this federal government, it was in New York City. Just imagine your representatives and your senators having to go to New York City you don't think New York City would manipulate things? You don't think New York City would say, hey, I'm sorry, the license plate is missing on your horse. So they said, when they're going to or coming from their job, the only thing they can be arrested for is treason, felony, and breach of the peace. Right? Okay.
Breach of peace is in there with felony, treason.
Yes.
That's what caught my attention.
Okay. So the question is, why those three? Right? Well,
My breach of peace is hammered down to loud music.
well, you have to understand. You have to understand that we've changed the use of certain terms, right? So treason, we understand, right? Benedict Arnold committed treason, even if he was a member of Congress going to his job, he could be arrested for it, right? Felony, a serious crime. Originally, what we would, a felony was meant to be a serious crime. And a misdemeanor was bad conduct that didn't really rate a crime. But there was one type of bad conduct that they thought would be worthy of being arrested for. Breach of peace is not what we today call disturbing the peace. Breach of peace is today we would more likely call incitement to riot. You know, we have, and they don't, but that's what it's saying is, so if your representative were to go, I would say, we're going to have, you know, the Let's Go Brandon parade, and we're going to the White House, and we're going to have a riot. I don't mean a demonstration. I mean an all-out riot. I mean attacking the gates. I mean picture BLM and Antifa. The fact that they are a congressman in the district for the purpose of business would not protect them from arrest because that was breach of the peace. Right? The fact that we think of it as disturbing the peace, it's that's a language difference.
So breach of peace would be more like Maxine Waters.
Yes. Yeah. Yes.
Yep.
Incitement to riot.
Yep, and that's what she did. Yes, Pelosi too. Chuck Schumer did too.
So, okay.
You're not going to remove those people from the federal government until you start controlling your states.
Yes. So I got a bug in the ear. Says we're not going to fix the federal government until we do the states, which brings up a point I want to make. And I'm kind of mixing and matching here. So I talked about the sheriff. Two important points I want to make. It is more important that you protect your neighbor's rights than that you protect your own. I know that's counterintuitive, but think of it this way. If you protect your own rights, you're standing alone. You're going to hang separately. If you protect your neighbor's rights, you're standing together.
Well, they understand that part and they stand for money.
Exactly. That's the point, is we should be standing for each other. People, I'm not going to, we should be standing for each.
Ideally, you should protect your neighbor whether they do yours or not.
If I'm gonna stick my neck out for someone that wants me dead for not getting the proper vaccine, I'd be some kind of idiot, yes?
That would be the right thing to do.
Yeah.
Funny moment of them saying, you know what? I get it now.
But here's the other thing. Washington, D.C., Tallahassee, Florida. These are the front lines in our fight for liberty. No questions about it. This is your home. This is your home base. I used to read a lot of Tom Clancy. I remember reading a line. Amateurs talk tactics. Professionals talk logistics. This is your logistics base. If you are not safe here, how can you go there to fight? How can I come here if my home isn't protected? You know, I know why I talk to my sheriff. Do I know why I have the advantage. I live in a rural county. It's easier for me. That's because I like living in rural areas. But it's important that I know that my family and my home is safe while I'm here fighting the fight. If you want to fix Washington, you start here for two very good reasons. One, you have infinitely more influence here than you will ever have in Washington, D.C. Infinitely more. Second of all, so I'm here in Pasco County. Yesterday, I was in Pinellas County. Day before that, I was in Manatee County. And I gave them all the same message. So what happens if Pasco County, you know what? We're going to be a constitutional county. We're going to make sure our sheriff is a constitutional sheriff. We're going to elect county officials that are constitutionally minded. We're going to make sure this is a safe county, a constitutional county. Great. What do they do that in Pinellas and Manatee? Now you've got a whole area that's like, ooh, connect the counties. And what happens? You start electing officials that go to Tallahassee that maybe are more constitutionally minded. What happens then? Florida becomes even more constitutional. Florida's good, but you still got room to improve. Now, I live in a rural county in Middle Tennessee. I have the same job. My job is to make that county a constitutional county, and my neighboring counties and my state, so that when Florida and Tennessee send our representatives to Washington, D.C., we're not sending more tyrants. We are sending constitutionally minded people. If you want to change the country, you start by changing your county. I know it's a mess. We spent 150 years building this mess. I used to have horses. You don't pile up horse exhaust for 150 years and get rid of it in a single 2-year cycle. Well, let me ask you a question. How do you eat an elephant? One bite at a time. My job is to shovel my horse exhaust. You shovel yours. And we start making a difference when we not only shovel, but when we show others how to shovel as well. And with that, I'm going to wrap up the live stream. I'll hang around. I see some people were checking out my books. I will answer more questions. I'm sorry I didn't get to the little talk I had, but I covered most of what I was going to talk. All of the books are available online, but if you buy them online, you have to pay shipping. And I do take credit cards if anybody wants. So, thanks everybody online. It's been weird, but we got through it. And we'll see you in I guess a couple weeks or so.
Oh.